some of the impacts in Damascus. Well, let's go to retired U.S. Army four-star General Barry McCaffrey, who remains standing by in Seattle. General, there's two things about his account I'd like to run by you first. First, you and I have been under cruise missiles when they fly overhead. They seem very tough to take down. Is it plausible that those were cruise missiles that we're hearing were perhaps intercepted?
Well, it very well could have happened, particularly if the Russian S-400 air defense batteries used either their electronic warfare capability or their missiles. They could potentially have knocked down the Tomahawks. You can see a Tomahawk if it's daylight, and it actually could be engaged with radar-guided guns from the ground. But look, you know, Brian, basically, really to echo Jeremy Bass's statement, this was a very competent, carefully crafted, extremely limited strike to send a strong military signal to the Syrian armed forces: don't use chemical weapons. And it appears that largely it avoided targeting in any significant way the Russian armed forces on the ground, and potentially the Iranians. But, you know, when you look at these three target sets, the storage of chemical weapons. During the Iran-Iraq war, there are literally hundreds of metric tons of chemical artillery and missiles and mortars fired at one another. The amount of chemicals required to kill unprotected civilians in populated areas down in basements is tiny. So I don't even remotely think we have degraded their chemical weapons stockpile at all.
Yeah.
There could be 100 barrel bombs in populated areas right now. I'm somewhat surprised there wasn't a major effort to go after the Syrian Air Force, particularly helicopters that deliver these systems. And then finally, if you want to hurt the Assad regime, you don't kill privates, you kill generals. So it doesn't sound as if there was a strike intended to take out their command and control facilities when they were manned. Now, the coming days, we're about to find out what the reaction of the Russians, the Iranians, the Assyrians will be. They will do something. We haven't seen the end of it, but this was a very moderate, calculated strike, fortunately, by 3 NATO nations, not just the U.S.
I'm looking at a very provocative headline in the New York Times. President Trump talked tough, but his strike on Syria was restrained, and that is exactly the point you're making. General, there's another point our journalist made, and that was he heard warplanes above. I was under the impression that certainly the American aircraft were in standoff positions and were not required to spend any time over target over places like Damascus. Could that have been outgoing aircraft?
Well, we'll find out probably more tomorrow when CENTCOM, Tampa, Florida, General Votel, the commander, starts getting, you know, after bomb damage assessment on what occurred. It appears as if manned aircraft were used. They may well have given the Brits and the French separate geographic target areas. It does not appear that the S-400s were employed. They cannot take on F-35 U.S. stealth aircraft. They darn sure can take on the Brit and French aircraft that may have been involved in this raid. So it appears the Russians hopefully sat it out and won't feel compelled to respond. A lot of, as you've heard and reported on, a lot of threats coming out of the Russian general staff in Moscow will not only target your missiles, will target the carriers. If they do that, they'll be in a very bad position. You don't want to take on U.S. naval air power or U.S. Air Force F-35. So hopefully, Secretary Mattis and Joe Dunford, it appears to me, tried to conduct a strike of symbolic and military value that wouldn't get us on the up escalation.
General, thank you. It's been a great pleasure for us to be able to have someone like you to ask all of our military questions to tonight. We really appreciate your candid answers. Indeed, as we were saying earlier in our coverage, this carrier battle group that the U.S. has assembled offshore to carry out some of what we've seen tonight is formidable.